West Virginia mountain melody. There's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies.
Welcome, and today we're joined by one of my true radio heroes. Since 1966, this gentleman has been a fixture over the airways of both radio and television in north central West Virginia. And I speak of none other than Mr. Radio, Lew Dobbins. Lew, thank you for joining me today at the Clarksburg History Museum.
Martha, thank you for inviting me. I know this is going to be enjoyable.
I've followed your career for decades, Lew. You're a hero of mine.
It's a long career.
I have lots of questions about television and radio. But first, I want to ask a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
Where were you born?
I was born in Weston at the old Weston Hospital. Was raised on McCann's Run. This is over in Lewis County. I was raised up on McCann's Run, and that's where I spent most of my young adulthood.
Was it a farm?
Farm. It was a farm. Yeah, farming neighborhood. McCann's Run is located just below Jackson's Mill, and that's where I grew up with my early childhood. Was on McCann's Run.
Who were your parents? What were their names?
My parents were Woodrow and Gladys Dobbins. My father was a heavy equipment operator and a boss among men. He was a foreman in coal mining.
Oh, okay.
But he was much more than that, Martha. I've been around some of the most talented people in the world. And he certainly would rate right up there at the top. He did so much with only an 8th grade education. He was a carpenter, expert carpenter. He could tear an engine down on a vehicle and put it back together again. He could fix televisions. His gardens would grace the cover of Home and Garden magazine. He was a bee farmer. He was just so talented. He was a witch, a water witch. You ever heard of a water witch?
Yeah.
Well, he
get the wells and everything?
Yeah, he found the wells all over Lewis County with a peach limb. I tried the process of the peach limb, and it wouldn't do anything for me, but for him, it would just, the stick would go right down to where the water was. And I know of 2 wells that he found, one from my Uncle Earl and the other from my Aunt Lady. Two wells that I know of that he founded. But he discovered wells all over Lewis County.
I wonder how those men of that generation and women, how did they do it all, Liz?
I don't know how they did it. My dad would be up before sunrise. He wouldn't come back till late in the evening, 5 or 6 o'clock. Then he'd go to the garden in the summertime and work till nightfall. And I often wondered why he went to bed at 9 o'clock at night. Well, at latter years of my life, I could understand why he went to bed at 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
He was just absolutely exhausted.
And I bet your mother worked hard too.
Oh, she did. She was a mother and wife 24/7. And back in those days, Martha, the women in the country didn't work outside the home. They worked at the house. They were the woman of the house. She did the laundry, the cooking, the housekeeping, the looking out for her husband and the children. In the city, it might have been a little different, but back in the country, the women didn't work. They were the woman of the house, and they took care of the house.
And they helped on the farm too.
And they helped on the farm.
Hayfield or milking cows.
Exactly. They went out before. I remember my mother going out to the garden before dinner and picking the tomatoes, the corn, and cucumbers, whatever we'd have for dinner that night. Yeah, she worked in the garden just as hard as my father did.
Now, when you were growing up, did you have a television?
I had a television, an old black and white DuPont, and I must have been 6 or 7 years of age when we first got the TV. And I remember my father putting the TV in, and we lived up the hall further than what we finally settled into, and he strung wire clear to the top of a mountaintop so we could pick up a station.
Oh yeah.
And we could pick up Wheeling, we picked up Oak Hill, and we picked up all these stations in a black and white TV. Yeah, I was very small, but I can remember.
Was your first love radio though?
First love was radio.
Did you get to hear the Jack Benny and Fibber McGee and all that?
Exactly, that radio. And I'd lay in bed at night with a transistor radio when I was young, and with an earplug in my ear, I could see Nashville, I could see Boston, New York, Chicago, all these disc jockeys on the air. And I thought to myself, that's what I want to do. I want to be on the radio. I want to do what they do.
So you knew that at an early age? I knew that at
a young age. That's what I wanted to do, sure enough, yeah.
How about like local radio? Who did you listen to?
Local radio, I listened to WHAW in Weston, Jack Caldo, listened to Jack Caldo. Before I went to work with him, I listened to Al Cox, which his air name was Al Newton. Listened to him all the time. And out of BUC and Buchanan, I would listen to Phil Phillips, who was on the radio there. Anyone I could listen to and pick up little bits and pieces of what they were doing, I would scan the radio constantly. It's what I wanted, day and night.
Do you remember Joe Barker, WBUC?
Joe Barker and I were good friends. Joe and I worked together, WBUC in Buchanan. And Joe was a legend. He was a star of the WWVA Jamboree. And I didn't really realize it at the time. I didn't know till later that I was in the graces of one of the great country music artists in West Virginia. Joe Barker was a great one. I got some old tapes of Joe at home.
I remember as a very small child,
Yeah.
I must have only been 6 or 7.
Happy-go-lucky Joe Barker.
Yeah, and they had an open house at WBUC,
Yeah.
and my grandma took me there, and I got to meet Joe Barker.
Yeah.
And I remember he had this beautiful sparkly suit on, something
Yes.
like Porter Wagner would
Yes,
have worn.
that was Joe.
It was amazing, but
Yeah.
can you believe, though, for just this little area,
I know.
the talent that we had?
He had a radio show on WBUC from 12:15 to 12:30 every day. And it was just him and a guitar and a harmonica. And it was so entertaining. And in his day, Joe was a big star of the WWVA Jamboree. Like I said, I got an old tape of one of his radio programs.
Oh, I'd love to hear
Oh,
that.
it's the real thing. Yeah.
So you learned from the best
I
just
learned
by
from
listening.
some of the veterans of the business. Yeah, sure.
I
enough.
bet you never missed Grand Ole Opry Saturday nights.
Oh, no. And my favorites on the Grand Ole Opry was Lester Flatterall Scruggs and the Foggy Mountain Boys.
Yeah.
And they were on at 8 o'clock, which would have been 7 o'clock in Nashville. They're an hour behind us. But yeah, I listened to the Grand Ole Opry. I would sit in the family room of our home. I had an old radio, and I'd have to move that radio around certain positions to pick up the station. I was constantly moving it, but I listened to the Grand Ole Opry. And in my car radio, I could pick up WSM quite very well. But yeah, Grand Ole Opry was one of my favorites.
Yeah, my
Sure.
dad never missed it.
Oh,
And boy, it
no.
would fade in and out,
Fade in and
but
out.
buddy, we'd stick right with
I
it, you
would
know.
stick right with it to the end. Yeah, till midnight.
Now, isn't that amazing? You were interested in that. None of your family was ever involved in broadcasting.
Never
or
involved in
anything.
broadcasting. I tell you what really got me interested in broadcasting, what really sparked me, was Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley performing on the Ed Sullivan Show. And I'd never thought about it till then. And I watched him and how he had that crowd just screaming, and he had him in the palm of his hand. And I said to my father, I said, one of these days I'm going to be in entertainment. It might not be there performing before the public with a guitar and a band, but I'm going to be on the radio some way or the other. And the other was being on-air personality. But Elvis Presley was the one that sparked me on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Now, I understand from your book, which we will talk about, but your first brush with announcing was when you were a junior high school.
Junior high school.
What event happened that knocked you into the limelight of people with your announcing?
They were having, if this was at Jane Lew High School, which I graduated from in 1966, last class to graduate before consolidation. But I was in the library. There was a play going on at the gymnasium down below the high school. And whoever wanted to go could go. Those who didn't want to, they could stay in the library and be there till after the play. Well, I didn't care to see Romeo and Juliet. It just did not appeal to me, Romeo and Juliet. So I went to the library. And the secretary came down from her office. She was crying. And she walked into the library and said, President Kennedy had just been shot. And we were all, the president's been shot. And the teacher said, someone should go down to the bottom of the hill and tell everyone that the president has been shot. So I immediately volunteered to do so. So I ran down to the bottom of the hill, ran in the door. And there were some teachers that I'd had a little problems with in the past with mischievousness, nothing serious, but a little orneriness from time to time. And they didn't believe me. They thought I was telling a joke, the president being shot. That's Lou, you went too far this time. You've went too far. And thank God there were a group of boys up in the balcony of the gym, and they were listening to the radio and said, no, he's telling the truth. The president's been shot. So the play was over with, and the the principal stopped everyone from leaving the gymnasium, and I went up on stage and announced the president had been shot. And I wasn't a bit nervous. It was just like it was supposed to happen.
It was natural.
It was natural. And I knew right then, I got to be on the radio or TV. I've got to communicate with the public. But that was the first time it really talking to the masses was the assassination of President Kennedy.
So I'm sure they had no classes at the high school about broadcasting. How did you get started to learn how to do that?
I wanted to get into the broadcasting, like I said, from an early age. But the first thing you had to do back in those days was to be licensed with the federal government. You had to be licensed by the federal government or you didn't get on the air. You went to Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, Maryland and took a test, a federal test. And it was called the third-class license. Now, you could purchase a magazine or a book that had certain elements of that test. It didn't have the exact questions, but certain elements of the test. So I went to Baltimore, passed the test because you had to have a third-class license. And the reason being, when you were on the air, and actually you were the one that was talking to the public. It wasn't pre-recorded like so many of the shows are today. And you had to have basic knowledge of the transmitter behind you. You had to take transmitter readings every half hour. You had to know what to do if there was a problem. You called the chief engineer in. But you controlled the whole radio station, the transmitter, and you doing your air show and the music and the commercials. It was a one-man show when you were on the air.
So you had to be qualified.
You had to be qualified to do that. Now, today, the third-class license is not required. It's deregulation.
I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, it was a huge mistake. You can put anybody on the air now.
Yeah.
But back then, you had to have some knowledge, some electronic knowledge, namely the transmitter, of what to do if there was a problem.
I think that's why you early guys and gals in broadcasting were so professional.
Well, we had to be.
Had
to be, yes, indeed. Because when I was, like I said, when I was on the air, I was there live. People could call up and talk to me. Now, unfortunately, Martha, so many of the programs are tape recorded.
It's all computer.
They're computerized, and it's not the same old disc jockey and playing music. There are some stations still do that, but very few.
Now, your first job was WDTV?
WDTV. I tried to get into radio because I had my third-class license. And that was mandatory. You had to have that first. But all the radio that I went to, they all wanted to have someone with prior experience. And I didn't have the experience of being on radio. I had my third-class license, but no experience. And I just happened one time to walk into Channel 5, which the station then was the old WDTV, located between Weston and Jane Lew, high atop Fisher Mountain. That was the old WDTV. And it was a rock-based road to get up to the station. You had to have almost a four-wheel drive to get up to
I bet that was fun in the wintertime.
In the wintertime, there were several accidents, Martha, on that hill. I mean, the vehicle was going over top of the hill.
It was straight up and down.
It was straight up and down, no pavement, just rock-based road. But I went up there, almost tore my car up getting up to the top of that mountain, but I wanted it so bad. That's the only place I hadn't checked with yet. So I went in and they had an opening for a live booth announcer. So I did an air check while I was there. They tape recorded my voice and asked me a lot of questions. And the next week or so, then I had the job at WDTV.
Now, a booth announcer, for those that don't know, what is that, Lew?
Booth announcer is, back in those days at DTV, everything was live. Your PSAs, your commercials, your station identifications, your opening of shows, everything was live from the booth. There wasn't any tape at DTV. Everything was live. You booth announced everything. You heard an ID, that was live. You heard a commercial, that was live. And it was a great training ground, Martha. It was just great training ground for someone that wanted to be in the radio because you learned the back time. In television and radio, everything is by the second. It's by the second. And you have to hit everything right on time. And that learned me when they come out of a network program and say there's 30 minutes before the next show, you had to fill for that 30 seconds. You had to, as a live booth announcer. And we had the PSAs to read. We had shows for the night that was coming up that I could read from and emphasize and preview the night. But it was a great training ground. It was absolutely fantastic.
Now, did you move into doing news there?
Eventually I did move into doing news. Now, I wouldn't say really it was what we would call rip and read. There wasn't a news department, but they had to have a body out there to do live news. This was 66. So yeah, I moved into doing some live television. In fact, I was doing the noon 6 and 11.
Did they have videotape then? Lou?
They had videotape, but was used very, very little. Most of what was shot was on black and white film. Most of what was shot was on that type of apparatus. They had the video, but it was used very sparingly, very sparingly.
So when you gave the news, were you more or less almost like a radio announcer sitting there reading it?
Reading, and the only difference was a camera was on me. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what it was. We had slides, of course, that we could use as points for our stories. And if we ever had any actual footage of an accident or something, it would be black and white film that someone accidentally stumbled upon and shot the film of. But we didn't have what you would call back in '66 a news department.
Tell the listeners, for those younger ones that don't know, and I do remember this one, when you got a breaking news bulletin, how did you get that? Because you had no computers, no cell phones.
It was on the AP wire service, or UPI. They were both operational at the time.
A big machine.
A big machine that typed. That's where I got most of my news, my state news, from when I did the anchoring of the news. It was from the teletype. And when a bulletin came on, you'd hear bells. 10 bells would chime. And that would be a bulletin about something miraculously has happened. Something really tragically has happened. And it was all from the teletype machine, which is non-existent today. You know, you've got your own local news departments, and I don't know whether they even use the wire machines today or not. I don't.
I doubt that they do.
I doubt if they do. I really don't know.
They look like sort of like a tank or something.
Like a tank, yeah, a great big enclosure, a big drum, and all the news came across from national, state, sports, weather, everything was on that.
And you just rip it off of there and read it.
Exactly. And they had news bureaus all across the country. From the National was in New York, Hong Kong, all across the country where they typed the news up. They had reporters out in the field.
Now, name some of the folks you worked with at DTV, your first job there.
Oh, my. Terry Matthews was there.
Oh, really?
Terry was working some, yeah.
Who was the manager then?
Manager then was a guy by the name of Nick Pellegrin. He was, in fact, the guy that hired me for the job at DTV. Back then, the business offices were in Fairmont, and that he gave me the job out of Fairmont. Bob Collins was there. Bob was an engineer, plus he did some voice work. And John Fitzwater, he was there.
How many cameramen did you have? One or two?
It had two cameramen. Most of the time, only one. They'd set the stationary camera on you, and that would be it. They'd just leave it on you and let you do the news.
Did they do like local shows, like children's shows, things
back before I came there? They had John Cooper.
John Cooper with the little dummy.
With the little dummy. Yeah.
Forget his name.
I forget the dummy's name, but yeah, he did a children's show. That's before I started to work there. Very popular show. Did a kid show, ventriloquism with this puppet of his. They had a dance party they used to have on Saturday night or Saturday afternoon where people could come in and dance and listen to music.
Oh,
and that was
I
all
like to have seen that come up the hill on Fisher Mountain.
Yeah, they had to get down and pick up people and bring them up the hill. They'd go down the four-wheel drive and take them to the top of the hill. It was a dance party. It was live TV. Everything was live. Nothing was taped. And it was a dance party, and I can't recall who did the dance party, but it was that was back in before I started, back in the late 50s.
And I remember when the tower fell there too, because we only had 2 channels out in the country where I lived at, 5 and 12.
I was there that night.
Were you?
Yes. And I was
what happened, Steve?
Well, what happened?
Lou, what happened?
The wind must have done it. That's the only thing that could have done it. I know I left after that, but I was in the newsroom, and what newsroom there was, and I heard this terrible crash right out from the window. And everything went dark in the station. And the tower, we couldn't believe it. The tower was gone. It was laying down over the hill.
You could have been killed. It could have came the opposite way.
If it hit the building, there would have been fatalities.
Yes.
Yeah, but thank God it went down the hill. But you couldn't believe the whole tower was laid. Remember seeing it?
I remember that. And I remember for the longest time, we didn't have Channel 5 to watch.
It was a long time. You're right. Yeah.
Now, when did you leave WDTV?
I left DTV the first time in 1966. I got my first radio job. And that was at WHAR in Clarksburg. And it was the first station to go all rock and roll. And I loved it there. I did my own radio show, plus I did commercial advertisements. But that was the first radio job, and I had my third-class license, so that got me in the door, and I had the experience of Channel 5, and that was icing on the cake for getting me the job.
What was your time slot?
My time slot was 6A or 5A to 10A.
Okay.
Bright and early. I was up every morning around
You're a morning guy
3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. Bright and
I
early.
love the ad you have in your book where it says, here are the fun-loving five that make the WHR scene 20 hours a day. And in that picture is you, Al Newton, Bob Fulton, Bob Ketzel, am I pronouncing?
Ketzel, that's right.
And Mike Simons.
Mike Simons, yeah.
You guys all got your kind of start there,
yeah,
huh?
we are. Yeah, HAR was the first, I think for most of us, the first broadcast station.
Did you bring in like local rock groups to perform?
They were brought in before I got there, Martha. Okay. Al Newton brought them in.
Oh, okay.
Or I don't know whether Al actually brought them in, but he emceed all the shows. But we had big name. Tom Jones was here at one time.
Really?
I couldn't believe Tom Jones was here. Oh my goodness!
Did they play at the Armory? Or
played the Armory? Gene Pitney was here. It was a Dick Clark Caravan of Stars.
Oh my!
And they would play Pittsburgh, and from Pittsburgh they'd come down because of the short trip from Pittsburgh to Clarksburg. They'd come to Clarksburg, perform in Clarksburg for a lower price because they were open that night, and might as well play for some money than not get any at all and have to pay expenses. But there were big stars. Tom Jones, Gene Pitney, I remember were there, but that was before I actually started.
Now, were you a rock fan? Did you know a lot about rock
fan.
music?
Oh yeah, I was a rock and roll fan. I was a country fan. The thing about me, even though I was playing rock and roll music, I still loved country music, and I listened to both of them. Mm-hmm. So I was educated in rock and educated in country because I wanted to keep an open mind on both musics. Now back then there were people that were rock only, and they were country only, and don't mention country, we don't want to hear it. And the country would say, don't mention rock, we don't want to hear it. But I kept an open mind back in the 60s. Both music, they have a meaning, they're good, and I want to know something about both of them in case I need to know something about some of them.
Did you ever interview anyone on air, like a rock performer of any kind?
No, I'd never at HAR. I did the air show and then did the commercials, but I never did. No, I didn't do any rock interviews at all. No.
How long were you there at HAR?
I wasn't there that long. I was there about the first time. See, I was there 2 times. I was there the first time about 6 months, and the only reason why I left, the station owner came in. He had a contract, and the contract read, you cannot work for another radio station within a 75-mile radius of WHAR. You can't work there. We own you. You cannot go anywhere but here. And I told him what to do with the contract, and he fired me. So I wasn't going to let anyone tell me where I was going to work, where it wasn't going to work. So then I went to work at HAW in Weston.
Oh, you did? Okay.
HAW in Weston, right out of HAR. Back in those days, there was Archie Posey was there. Denny Norman was there. Terry White was the manager. And back then I did an air shift and commercial production. Yeah.
That's another station that's up on the mountain, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. HAW. Yeah, I walked that mountain several times in the winter. Couldn't get the car up. The snow was just too high to get the vehicle up the mountain.
And what kind of format was that they played?
Everything. It was block programming. I started out in the morning with country, and that was from 6 to 8, and then from 8 to 9 was mostly news. The swap shop was in there.
Oh, you did the swap shop?
I did the swap shop on the phone, not like Steve Peters does it today, but I did it on the phone. Didn't have guests or anything, but we did the swap shop, and then we went to big band music. I mean, Stan Kenton, Guy Lombardo, that type of music till around 2 in the afternoon. Then country from 2 to 3, and then rock and roll from 3 to 5, and then it was a daytime to daylight to nighttime station, so they had to sign off at sunset. So it depended on how much time they had for the other type of music after the rock and roll was over at 5.
How many wattage was that when you worked?
1,000 watts.
1,000 watts.
1,000 watts. Yeah, 1,000 watts. And it was one of those block programming stations that played a little bit of everything. Yeah, when I didn't have a news department, just good guys trying to entertain the public.
Now I'm going to jump to WPDX because let me tell you, Lew, growing up, that was the station we kept on all the time. And I grew up with WPDX country, Big X Country.
Big X Country.
Big X Country. Yeah. When did you start at PDX?
PDX, I started, must have been 1972, I would say, something like that, 73. And I was there till 79.
Did you start when they were in the Stonewall Jackson Hotel?
I started when they were in the Stonewall Jackson Hotel. Then we moved from there down to the old Eagle Glass and Paint building, down from the old Sheraton Inn. But I started out there as an announcer and commercial reading. Then later on, when we went from PDX went to FM 109 or 104.9, they wanted a news department. So I volunteered to be the newsman at WPDX. So I covered news from 77 to 79 in a 2-year period. Did nothing but news, then did an air shift on the weekend, which I love doing news. Radio news I really loved.
You were great at that.
Well, I enjoyed it. I really did.
Lou, I want to talk a little bit about the history of WPDX. I know that they signed on August 19th, 1947. And some of the live entertainers in that day, Little John and Cherokee Sue, and I think Grandpa Jones performed there in the early days. And there's a picture of Roy Acuff there at WPDX.
Right.
I don't know if he performed there or just came in to visit or what. I don't know if you've heard any stories about that.
Well, my understanding was he just came in to visit. He was familiar with John and Sue, and I guess he had performed with them in the past, and he knew they had a show in Clarksburg. He was passing through on his way to another show somewhere. So he was en route, and he just stopped in. He knew they had a daily radio program on WPDX, so he just stopped in and say hello.
Isn't that something?
That's
they would
something.
Just stop in.
The king of country music, yeah.
And WPDX was AM up until 1974,
right.
And then they went FM.
Yeah.
But I wanted to. I remember before they went to FM, and when they would always sign off at sundown,
had to.
They played Jim Reeves. May the good Lord bless and keep you. I always remember that.
Yeah. That's when they were a sunrise to sunset station, Martha. They went on at sunrise and they went off at sunset. They were 1,000 watt AM, 750 on the dial, and in 74 they went to the FM. They couldn't get all the advertisers on the AM radio station because of the hours, sunrise to sunset. So they found a frequency in Clarksburg that had an opening for an FM station. So that's why they went to the FM, so they could get more commercial time on and have a clearer signal.
Oh, okay.
That was in 74, yeah.
Okay. Were they one of the first stations to go FM?
They were one of the first, yeah. They were one of the first in Clarksburg to go FM, yeah.
Now, yeah. I remember WPDX. My childhood was the 60s and 70s, early 80s. I missed out on all the live entertainers that used to be there. I just bet that was an amazing time, though.
Well, it was before my time too, but the entertainment basically was live entertainment constantly. I mean, had live shows. Just here it is, and they performed live. Little John, Cherokee Sue, Grandpa Jones, and the list. Budge and Fudge, the Mays brothers. The list went on, and it was predominantly back in the 50s. It was local entertainment, right, live from the studio. And I was very small. I can remember some of it, but not very much of it back in the late 50s.
I gave you a copy of something I found on Facebook, the WPDX announcers from way back in 1952. John Peters was on there.
I recognized John Peters on there. And John, what a great guy he was. I never worked directly with John before, but we were at different radio stations that we both worked at before. And he was a great guy.
Had a great voice.
Had a great voice. Tremendous broadcaster. Just absolutely one of the best in the business. One of the best.
Some of the other folks on that picture, who was the other one that you kind of recognized?
DeWitt Wyatt. I remember DeWitt. He went in from PDX. He went into the insurance business.
Oh.
And he and his wife had an insurance business for many years in Clarksburg.
Oh, okay.
Now the others, I can't recall the other people that are on this page, but John Peters, dear friend. I noticed him immediately. It's solid black hair. He looked young.
He looked good even when he had the white hair.
He was good with white hair. What a pro.
Now, some of the people I remember, I'm going to mention these DJs that they were like my friends to me.
Oh, I'm sure.
Mike King. What a great voice. Oh, they all had great voices.
Well, the thing about PDX, I was there from the early 70s to the end of the 70s. And they were the first station in the market to go all country. They were the first one. had an enormous radio listening audience, enormous audience. And the people on air became more than a person on air. They became like the person next door.
Yes.
People got to know them like they were friends because PDX established radio personalities where the personality was as popular as the music they were playing.
And just to read, this is some of them I remember now. I know I'm leaving out some, but Mike King, Mark Mills, Frank Carroll, Lee Rhodes, Don Reynolds, Gary Poling, Bill Wilson, Don Niles. And I know there were ladies too, but I don't remember the names.
Yeah.
But I do remember. And they didn't all just work radio. I mean, like Gary Poling taught school at WI.
He taught school at WI. He was a history teacher.
Yeah, they had other jobs.
Yeah.
But look how many people, that's just your on-air announcers that were employed at a radio station back then.
Exactly, right.
And then you had a whole staff.
Exactly,
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But they all had, like you said, their own personalities. But the show I remember you and Mike King with was That Your Opinion.
Oh, my.
To me, was that sort of like early talk radio? Because
I established that show. That was my show.
How did you come up with that idea?
Well, I formed a news department at PDX, and they never had a news department. And I wanted to be able to do some news and let the public get acquainted with the news operation as much as they were with the country music operation. So it just came to me one day, what about a sounding board for people that want to express themselves? And it just came up one day, and I said, well, we'll try it and see how it goes. We'll test it. And my goodness, it went off like wildfire.
Oh, yeah.
Tremendous. Yeah.
Sometimes it get pretty heated during the city elections and stuff.
Yeah, it really got to. Some of it had to be cut from time to time.
I was wondering because I remember some of it.
Some of it had to be cut. But yeah, Your Opinion was my show. One of the most proudest moments of my life was putting together that program. Yeah, it was a success.
Yeah, that was really, I mean, my mom and I never missed it, you know.
Well, here's the thing, Martha. People that necessarily didn't like country music, they tuned in to hear Your Opinion. People that necessarily didn't like country music tuned in to hear the news because I brought all the up-to-date local news. It was all local, Clarksburg and surrounding counties. And people would tune in to hear the news. And hopefully, if you can hook them in for the news, they'll stay for the country music side of things. So I was very proud of that.
What's some of the big news stories you remembered while you were there?
Oh, my.
We had a lot of fires here in town.
We had the fires in town, shootings in town.
Well, you had that whole Iran-Contra hostage thing going on while you were there.
It was going on. Yeah, it was. But I covered mostly local news. City Hall was a big topic of mine. I covered heavy.
You got to interview a president, didn't you?
President Nixon. That was the highlight of my career. I have to say, people ask me what was the highlight, and I have to say interviewing the President of the United States. Although it wasn't quite an interview, he just said a few things, but I was standing there with him, and he walked on. It was at the Forest Festival, and Governor Arch Moore was walking with the president up to the platform where he was going to speak at the Forest Festival in Elkins. And I was waving at the governor, which he and I had a good rapport. And I was pointing to the president to bring him over to the rope because it had a rope line set up. You could only go so far. And Governor Moore brought him over to me. And I got one question. I said, welcome to West Virginia. And he took it from there.
Oh, wow.
He took it from there. How it was great to be here in the Mountain State. Typical politician. Mountain State, beautiful mountains, beautiful country. It's just great to be here among the fine people of West Virginia. And he was right there right beside me. Yeah. So that's something I'll never forget.
What an experience.
Yeah, that was an experience. Yeah, the President of the United States. Yeah.
Now, walk me through those that don't know, because radio's changed a lot.
Oh, my, yes.
If you were on an air announcer coming in, let's say you had a 10 o'clock spot shift, what would you do to prepare for that? What would your day be like?
If I went on the air at 10 o'clock, first thing I'd would go to the music library and pick out the music that I thought would appeal to my public, my radio listening audience. The music would go first, try to get the music all over.
And this is all on the LPs?
This is all on vinyl, all on vinyl, 33 and 3rd RPMs and 45 RPMs. But I would go and get all the music established. And I always did a lot of interviews. So from time to time, I'd have interviews set up and ready to lock into a certain area of my program. and always left the line open for public to call in and talk if they wanted to.
And you took requests.
Took
too.
requests. We had a direct request line, 623-1818, I believe it was. And you could call directly in and try to, we couldn't get them all in, but we got a lot of them in, requests that people would call in. So it was a one-man show. People listened to, now this was back then, not now, but back then the person on the air was controlling everything. They were the radio station. They were controlling the transmitter, the board in front of them, which controlled the music, the turntables, the commercials, the announcing, plus back timing the clock, making sure everything operates on seconds. So it was just a one-man show. Now you tune in and it's not like that anymore.
It's all computer.
It's computerized. Yeah.
But even like your remotes, you'd have someone out doing a remote, but you at the station had to coordinate all that.
Engineer at the station, engineered the audio, and remotes were popular. We did a lot of remotes.
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you before, I have some tapes that I've taped back in the 80s, and I can't believe how many remotes you guys did and for how long.
They were popular.
Like 4 hours.
4-hour remotes in the field. Oh, I loved the remotes. You got out among the public. They got near you. Perhaps they had never met you before, and this was an opportunity for the public to come out and meet you. And we they were very successful for the business in which we were doing the remote. Very successful.
Did you have to, if you were an announcer, did you have to sell radio time too?
I sold radio time when I was at I didn't have PDX, but at KKW, when I went to work for KKW in the early days, I sold radio time. Yeah.
And then how would you make up your own commercial
I'd write
script and all that?
In small market radio, you go out and sell your commercial, then you come back and you write it, you produce it, you record it. It's a one-man show. You do it all yourself. We played our commercials on cartridges back then. We would record them on cartridges, and everything was a one-man show. You sold it. In my position, what I sold, I did myself. Now, the other salesmen that weren't announcers, they passed along the copy to other writers or announcers, and they would write up the copy and flower it up for commercial purposes. But me, I did all my own stuff. Everything I sold, I did myself.
I bet you look back and think, how did I do all that?
I don't know how I did it. It was, because the hours were grueling.
So when you were at PDX, you had all those announcers. Was Walker Trumbull, I think?
Walker Trumbull was a station manager.
He was a station manager. You had secretary, I suppose.
Had a secretary, had a bookkeeper. Yeah.
All those people for that radio station.
Secretary, bookkeeper, sales manager, salesman. Yeah, it was quite an operation.
That's amazing. All those people. Yeah. Now I think, what is it? Just one person maybe controlling the board?
It's not like it used to be.
I was wondering too about this. I forgot to ask you this before. Country music, I thought, in my opinion, but maybe I'm wrong, started changing, I think, with the outlaw movement.
Mm-hmm.
Do you kind of think that's when it started to change?
It started changing in that mode, yeah.
Like with Willie and Waylon
Jennings and David Allan Coe and people like that.
Did you get any flack from playing certain songs?
Oh yeah, there was a lot of old country performers, which are country listeners that would call up and they would let you know that it wasn't country you were playing or what they defined as country.
Because I think you guys were even playing like the Eagles.
Oh, we were playing
back
the Eagles.
In the early days.
Yeah, we were playing the Eagles.
Would the program director let you have free reign on what you wanted to do?
Yeah. Well, to a certain degree, you had a list in front of you, and it told you what record to play at what particular time of your shift. We had records called recurrent. We had oldies. We had album cuts. And you played right by that chart. But if it played by that chart there and the music that was in the control room, if it was in the control room, it was open season.
Oh, okay.
The program director put it in the control room. It was up to him. He controlled the music.
So you didn't try to sneak in
something. No, you didn't.
You'd lose your job.
No, exactly right. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the entertainers that came to Clarksburg. And I don't think a lot of people realize, you could be right there with them. Yeah. I mean, they came mostly Nathan Golf Armory.
Nathan Golf Armory were all the country music shows back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s were were held at. Yeah.
And you could get up close and personal
Oh,
with
do
those
interviews
people.
with them. Yeah. It was a different time too, Martha. It was a time where the artists really depended on radio to get their record on top and get the audience for them. Today, it's not the same. I mean, the artists today are just there are very few of them sign autographs. Very few. Not like the old entertainers that really come up from the ground floor up. They knew where it was at, and they signed autographs and took pictures with you and
Come to
did
the
interviews.
studio and do an
Oh,
interview.
doing an interview. Yeah, that was just part of what they did. Yeah. It's not like that anymore. No. It's too big. It's gotten too big.
I think that's kind of
Yeah,
sad.
well,
We've
it's
lost
sad.
that.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But I want to mention your book before I go any further.
Okay.
You wrote a book called Behind the Microphone. Love it.
Well, thank you.
When I first got this book, Lew, I like couldn't put it down. I hated to like, oh gosh, I have to go to bed and I have to finish reading this because it was so entertaining. And I want to talk a little bit about that. What made you want to write it, first of all?
There were people down through the years that would come up to me and say, when are you going to write a book about your adventures? Because we know that you've had a lot of adventures. And I'd say, oh, one of these days when I get time. I never had time to do it. It's always busy. And one day I sat down. I just got to thinking, I got a lot to say. I did a lot. And I need to leave a legacy of some kind. When I'm long gone, people can look back and say, my goodness, that guy was, he was into a lot of stuff. So it took about 2.5 years for the formation of the book to come to completion. I had my wife, Cynthia, my son, Jason, his wife, Anitra. They were doing research. I was writing my stories. And my stories were difficult because all the interviews, I say most of the interviews I did down through the years. So I had to take those interviews and transcribe them from tape to words. So you had to, and it was time consuming because it was a book. It wasn't audio anymore. You had to write down the words on the tape. So
I bet it brought back even more memories that you thought you forgot about.
More, tapes that I never even thought I saved, but I saved most of them.
It's just a fascinating.
And most of that's not all of that's part of what I did, but
you need to do a part 2.
I could do a part 2. I really could, Martha. There's so much more that I've done that's not in the book.
Well, I want to say Lew was so kind to donate us some books here at our History Museum to our bookstore. And if anyone wants a copy of it, we have copies available, signed copies by Lew, and I highly recommend. It's not only just country music, it's growing up in the area and all of that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to take away from your book, but I want to ask you a few things that I saw in the book here, because you have so many great stories. I have to hear the story of Farron Young coming to Clarksburg and his connection to Clarksburg. That's a good one.
Well, Farron Young left a very, very big impression in Clarksburg. And it wasn't on the positive side of the impression. It was on the negative side. Farron had a drinking problem. He always had. And he came into Clarksburg to do 2 shows, one in the afternoon, one in the evening at the Nathan Golf Armory. Well, his song at the time was This Little Girl of Mine. It was a big top 10 record. And what he would do spontaneously, he would go into the crowd and pick out a little girl, bring her up on stage, set her on a stool, and sing to her. Oh, the audience crying, old people, young people, they were really touched by it. It was a touching song about this little girl. Well, the first show went off without a hitch. He went down, got a little girl, brought her up. She just sat there and he sang and talked to her, and it was a magnificent performance. Now, he'd been drinking, but he hadn't had enough alcohol in him to really mess things up yet. Yet, I say. So the second show came. So Farron has been drinking all time in between. And he comes out for the second show, and he comes to that part with this little girl of mine. And before that, though, he had been saying some pretty derogatory remarks. I mean, telling some really risque jokes, and people were starting to boo. Now, that was before he went and got the little girl. He
already had him worked up.
Already had him worked up with off-color stories. So he went down and got this little girl, and the little girl didn't want to go. She grabbed a microphone from him and spit in his face. And he turned around, picked her up, and whacked her about 3 times on the back end and threw her down in the chair, jumped up on stage and said, I didn't want to come to this blank town anyway, and threw the microphone down and walked off the stage before the show was even over.
Gosh.
Well, he got as far as Parkersburg. That's where the state police pulled him over. Judicially, I don't know what happened, but I know monetarily, civil-wise, they settled out of court for the damages to what he done to the little girl.
It was all over nationwide
Oh,
newspaper.
it was pathetic. Farron had been in all kinds of scrapes all throughout his career, but this was the biggest one yet. I mean, he could have, if that would have happened today, this was back in the 70s that happened. He'd have probably done some jail time.
Oh, I would assume he would have.
I'd say
Did
he
that
would.
sort of put an end to his career, though?
Oh, I
Maybe
would have thought so. Yeah.
because I saw it in national news.
Oh, yeah, it was national coverage. Yeah.
What a shame.
Yeah, it was a shame. But now, as far as an entertainer, a singer, when Farron was straight, he was right on the money. He was tremendous singer, tremendous entertainer. He was great, fantastic personality. But when he went to the bottle, that everything went to pot.
What a shame.
Yeah, it's a real shame. And he ended up committing suicide.
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he committed suicide. He couldn't stand life anymore, and he shot himself. Yeah.
So many country entertainers ended that way, didn't they?
So many. Another one that ended it that way was Mel Street.
Yeah.
Mel was just now he was just catching on fire, getting a lot of airplay, a lot of working with big shows. In fact, he was in Clarksburg, worked with Loretta Lynn.
Didn't he have number one strings, like 2 or 3 right in a row?
Right in a row, big hit records.
Smoky Mountain Memories.
Oh, good stuff.
Yeah.
And he came to Clarksburg working with Loretta Lynn, and he opened up for Loretta. And then 2 weeks later, he shot himself. Yeah.
And then Keith Whitley.
Keith Whitley was a dear friend. Keith was one of my closest friends. I thought the world of Keith Whitley. He thought the world of me. I was one of the first disc jockeys to give him a break in playing his music. And he just had a drinking problem. And he sat down one day and just drank himself to death, alcohol poisoning.
And he was really on the cusp of just taking off.
Martha, he'd be in the Hall of Fame today.
Yes.
Hall of Fame, no doubt whatsoever. He would be in the Hall. But he had a problem that he tried to overcome. He fought it. I talked to Lori Morgan, his wife, about it. He tried, and he was on medication and all this, but still, she was out of town that day on a performance somewhere, and he was all by himself. And that's when he got in trouble, when he was by himself. He just sat there and drank himself to death. What a tragedy.
That was, because they had
terrible.
So much ahead of them.
Oh, so much their whole life. Yeah.
How about Johnny Paycheck? Did you ever interview him?
Paycheck.
I bet he was
I met Johnny Paycheck, but I never was around Johnny Paycheck that much. No, but he was another one of those outlaws.
Yes.
He was in the news a lot for writing bad checks. I know that. But I never was around Paycheck that much, but he was one of the outlaws. But I seen him perform a lot, and he always put on a show. He was tremendous entertainer.
He worked with George Jones, didn't he? Isn't that how he started out?
George and Johnny worked together for I guess several years. And
so tell about George Jones.
George Jones credited a lot of his singing styles to Johnny Paycheck. And that high-pitched voice.
And you got to interview George Jones
and Tammy Wynette were together at the Armory in the 70s, and they both smoked like freight trains.
Really?
Oh, my goodness, yeah. We went into a dressing room, and the room was just, you could have went in there with a knife and cut it. But they were really nice people. At that time, I don't know whether they were getting along or not, but at least for the interview, they were getting along. And they were just a loving couple, telling about their lives and their music and where they came from. And they were just really nice people, really good-hearted, down.
They were kind of like the Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor of country music.
Exactly. One minute they'd be all right, and the next minute they'd be throwing bottles at each other. Yeah.
Tell the story about Tom T. Hall coming.
Tom T. Hall was in Grafton at the Taylor County Fair. I was emceeing that show. Tom came out on the show, and he was right in the middle of his set. This airplane came flying over and had a streamer on it. It was advertising, I think, some furniture store. And right in the middle of the song, he said, "Stop the music." And everything stopped. And he looked up at that helicopter or plane, and he pointed up, and he said a few short words, "This is my show, and my show only. I am the star, and that is it. Get out of here." Yeah.
All live.
Yeah, alive. Yeah, because he just stopped the whole show because his plane was just the plane. The advertisers knew how to really get an audience and go over the stage when Tom T. Hall's performing, and people in the audience are going to see it. I mean, it was an ingenious idea, but Tom T. Hall did not favor it whatsoever. He let the people know that he didn't.
Now, talking outlaw, didn't you interview Willie Nelson?
Willie Nelson, yeah, Willie. I shook hands with Willie, oh, years and years and years ago. It was before he really got popular. He was in the 60s. Willie was a clean cut suit and tie guy, wrote a lot of music, but never really got that kind of recognition that he deserved.
And he sang too.
And he sang, yeah.
But never really
he got fed up with Nashville, and he went to Texas and started his own movement. He was probably the king of the outlaws. And he went to Texas, and he's from Texas anyway, Abbott, Texas. And he went down there and did what he wanted to do. They wouldn't let him do it in Nashville. They confined him to a certain type of music. They do a lot with these entertainers. You do this type of music, and that's all you do. You do this type of music. They lock them into a certain area, and they can't get out of it. Well, Willie wasn't like that. He didn't want to be locked into a certain area of singing songs. He wanted to expand his horizon and singing different types of songs. So he went to Texas, tore it up, and from there it just went.
I really think that changed country.
He changed,
in my opinion.
Him and Waylon and David Allen Coe. Johnny Paycheck was a big mover in that. The outlaw movement was
Charlie Daniels.
Daniels. Oh yeah, Charlie.
Hank Jr.
Hank Williams Jr. was a big contributor. Yeah.
What a show he would put on.
Oh my, yeah. Hank's a personal friend. I haven't talked to Hank for years, but Hank, he could play any instrument. It's unreal. When he did the show, he went from one instrument to another, played every instrument on stage, and played them excellently. But he was such an entertainer. He was
when he broke out of that mold of they wanted him to be like his dad.
Like his dad, yeah.
You know? And to me, I just thought he was boring.
Yeah,
a singer.
He was, yeah.
To me, when I hear that early stuff.
Yeah.
But then, man, when he broke out as his own man and his own music, wow.
Yeah,
it's like lightning.
And that's exactly what happened. He became his own man and recorded what he wanted to record. It was a lot like Willie Nelson. Willie, they tried to lock him in, but they couldn't lock Hank in. They tried to lock him in, but he took so much of it, enough was enough. And he said, I'm going to do it my way or it ain't going to happen. So he did it his way. And well, the rest is history. He was at one time, five-time Entertainer of the Year.
There were so many different avenues that country took. Like you have the Kenny Rogers sort of thing, where I thought he brought a little bit something different to country.
Well, you had Kenny Rogers singing She Believes in Me. Then on the other side, you had Hank Williams singing OD'd in Denver.
Yeah. Yeah, when you hear that early stuff, right. I mean, it's like,
it was just contrasting stuff.
And then you'd have John Denver.
Then you'd have that whole
Rocky
Mountain High.
Like that folk kind of thing.
Folk music, yeah. Country folk, yeah, what I called it. Yeah.
How did you like that transition? Because you were kind of there in the early country days.
I found it refreshing. I liked it. I liked that the Eagles and you listen to some of the early Eagles stuff, it can be played as country.
Yes.
They had the steel guitar in it, and it was designed for that type of audience, a country music audience. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. But I could the winds of time were changing. And I never thought they'd change as much as what they did, but they surely did change.
Now, my dad loved the old, I remember as a child, we went up to Hex Plaza and we watched Kitty Wells perform on the back of a flatbed truck.
Yes.
And he loved that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I just don't care for that. I like Dolly Parton or Loretta Lynn,
Well, here's the thing, Martha. I was raised on country from the 50s, 60s, 70s. And this new country started coming out, and a lot of it was coming out, and I didn't really care for it that much because it wasn't my type of country.
Yeah.
But to the new audience, and they were targeting to a new audience, to the younger audience, this was their brand of country. This is the country that they know. So if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, what do you think of the country? I'd say I didn't like it. But now I've been listening to a good bit of country music, and there's some good songs out there.
There really
There's
are.
some really good
And I'm
songs.
appreciating the older
Oh
now
yeah.
that I'm older. That Kitty Wells pretty
Oh
amazing
my, she
lady.
was amazing. Yeah, and her husband Johnny Wright, they sure were.
I mean, and in
They could
Dad loved
sing.
Roy Acuff.
Roy Acuff, they could sing.
They could sing,
And
and
they
it was
entertained.
all just natural.
It was all natural.
You know, like
Yeah.
Loretta Lynn.
Yeah.
Came from coal miner's daughter.
Yeah,
You know,
look what happened.
Look what a talent.
Look what she done.
I saw Dolly Parton the other night on an old Porter Wagner show.
Oh, yeah.
It was the first one that she was on, Porter
Oh
Wagner.
my.
And she was singing, her first hit, I think, was Dumb Blonde.
Dumb Blonde, that was it.
And I think one of the lines was, I'm a dumb blonde, but I'm not anybody's fool. And boy,
Yeah.
she wasn't, was she? She's out there still reinventing herself. And I just think she's amazing.
She recently did a rock and roll album.
Yeah.
I mean, a solid I'm talking rock and roll album, nothing country to it. But she's, like you said, she's inventing herself all the time. Wonderful lady. Met her back in the 70s at the Nathan Golf Armory, and I'll never forget, she had a green jumpsuit on. I got a picture in the book of it. And she was just absolutely just a wonderful lady. And I asked her why she broke away from Porter, and she felt it was time for her to branch out on her own, which was the best decision she made.
She's so talented.
But she's so talented, and along with that talent is a business savvy. What a businesswoman. She can really do a business contract.
And I have to admire those early country ladies.
Oh,
you know,
my,
like
yes.
Tammy
They paved the
Wynette.
way. They paved the way for all the new today. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think a lot of these younger folks appreciate
I don't think they really appreciate the sacrifice that the old timers went through.
And you know, some of those songs, Lew, that they put out, I thought were kind of controversial for their time, like Loretta Lynn's The Pill and all that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Now, when did you leave WPDX?
I left PDX in 1979.
And then where did you go?
I went to WDTV. I was a news director.
Okay.
Television. I worked in television there for a couple of years, and I liked television, but I loved radio. Television was fine, but I loved radio. I just wasn't all that into television. So I went from there to BOY television because of the offer that they made me. And in between the two television stations, I worked at 5, got out of the business, did some own freelance work on my own, and then I went back to BOY, which was right after DTV. But
work with Mike Simons there.
I worked with Mike Simons at KKW. Now, KKW came in later after BOY. And Mike was a tremendous promoter. He was a great promoter, wonderful individual. He knew where it was at. And he and I did a lot of things together.
We're trying to get some things in here from his son. I'm hoping his son will donate some things to the museum, because he needs to be highlighted.
Oh, he was so, he did all he did Clarksburg plays and theater, and was the manager of WPDX and was at BOY. But at PDX, or at KKW rather, he really put that station on the map.
And that was all country too.
It was all country too, yeah.
I think they did a little bluegrass.
Well, it was. When he came, we were playing everything. Bluegrass, country, middle of the road, everything's being played. He came in and said, we're going to specify one music that's country music. So we did away with the other and went strictly with the country music. And the popularity just took off, went right through the roof.
Who were some of the folks you worked with there at KKW?
I worked with Jim Dorsey.
Oh, yeah, Jim Dorsey.
Jim Dorsey, worked with Jim. Chris Boyles, worked with Chris. Worked with, of course, Mike. And that's the only ones I can remember right now.
Yeah, that was I used to listen to that when they had all that.
Well, Mike changed it all. Mike Simons needs to be in this museum. He surely does.
What about, I wanted to touch a little bit on the women in broadcasting. I mean, you worked with Frances Basile.
Frances Basile.
Great.
She was a great lady. Had the afternoon show every day at noon.
And they were early pioneers.
Frances was an early pioneer. She surely was. She really knew what she was doing. She did a great interview. She was one of the ladies that blazed the trail.
And Dusty
Wayman. Or Dusty
Spellsberg,
yeah. She was another one. Mary Morning. she did a lot for ladies in broadcasting. And another lady also was in broadcasting. It was Flo Vestpoint. She worked on WHAR. She did the trading post every day from 11 to, I believe, 11:30, and she was on there forever doing what was called the trading post. She'd read cards and letters that came in,
okay.
something like the swap shop,
Yeah.
but it was all written down.
Okay.
Yeah, it was all mail in.
Cherokee Sue was
Yeah.
on WPDX.
Oh, Cherokee Sue, after performing with Little John, yeah, she performed with the best, and then she went on to become PDX. Yeah,
Was that unusual though to have women that early? I mean,
it was very unusual to have women in broadcasting that early, doing that well, because it was usually a man's business, and that's just the way it was. Unfortunately, that's just
the times.
It was the times. It was the times. But Cherokee Sue was a trailblazer. She sure was. What a singer. She was fantastic. What a nice lady. Nice lady.
So I'm going to jump on up to the year 2008, which was a big year for you.
Oh my, yes, yes.
You got your name up there with Little Jimmy Dickens and Don Knotts, and you were inducted into the West Virginia Broadcasters Hall of Fame. And boy, Lew, that was just amazing. I think it was well deserved.
Well, thank you.
Should have came way sooner than 2008.
Thank you, Martha.
How did that come about?
Steve Peters, our good friend,
our good
nominated me. And once a nomination is made, then they go through the procedures of seeing, well, let's see what this guy's all about. So he nominated me, and they went through their criteria, did research on me. And one day I got a call and said, you warranted. In fact, you're past warranting a place in the Hall of Fame. Would you like to become a member of the Broadcasting Hall of Fame? I said, well, I sure would. So that's how it all came about.
That's such an honor, Lew.
2008.
Well deserved.
Yeah. Oh, well, I really appreciated that.
I have to mention Steve Peters.
Oh, yeah, sure.
He's our friend. You talk about how radio was. Steve still does it. Yeah. He's a one-man operation with 3 radio stations. He cuts the grass. He does the programming. He does everything there. It's amazing to me. And such an inspiration to me, because I'm telling you, I wouldn't do these podcasts if it wasn't for Steve Peters.
Steve never ceases to amaze me, and how he does what he does. I don't know how he does it.
I don't either.
I really don't know. I have not a clue on how he runs 3 radio stations, sitting in one seat. And that's what he does. HAW in Weston. He sits there and he controls WOTR, WHAW, and what's the one in Glenville?
The Glenville WVRW.
WVRW 107.7.
Yeah.
And he controls all 3 of those radio stations. I don't know how. And like you said, he cuts the grass, maintains everything.
Transmitter goes something wrong. Yeah, he has to run out to Glenville to go take care of it.
Fantastic. He's gifted.
He is. And I hope people would tune into his radio stations.
Oh, yes.
I'm telling you, it's a dying art, what he does.
Oh, and you never know what you're going to hear. That's the nice thing about it. You tune in, you might hear a solid bluegrass show, and the next time you tune in, you might hear the top 40 country music show.
And the interviews he does.
The interviews are great.
And Swap Shop.
Swap Shop is a show all by itself. Don't miss the Swap Shop.
That's my Saturday morning.
Saturday mornings beginning at 9 a.m. If you haven't tuned into the Swap Shop, you haven't listened to radio.
That's the truth, because you never know what you're going to hear.
You don't know what you're going to hear on that show.
I've heard him sell, there was a coffin on there one time and a cat box on wheels, and you just never know what you're going to say.
And that's on 980 AM in Weston and 96.3 FM WOTR.
Yeah, please tune in,
if you
folks,
haven't listened
because
to it,
it's great.
You owe it to yourself.
It's great. And Steve does my bumper music for the podcast.
Oh, does he?
Yeah, he does that. We do the beginning and the end of one of his songs. He's singing.
Oh, I see.
It's great. I told him I won't do this podcast unless we have that on there.
Yeah.
So what are you doing today? What's going on?
I'm not doing anything but doing things like we're doing right now. I'm doing interviews from time to time. I've kicked back, and I've said this before, I'm going to retire and not do anything, do what I want to do when I want to do it, and that's what I'm doing now, Martha. I'm getting up there in years, and I've paid my dues, and that's not to say that I won't continue to do interviews from time to time if the timing is right and the artist is right. But As for right now, I'm retired. I'm just absolutely retired, doing shows like we're doing right now, which I love to do. I
We
love to
just love
reminisce.
having you,
I
Lew.
love reminiscing.
I loved I could sit here and listen to you all week. I love
Well, I
these
appreciate
stories,
that.
and we're so thankful to have you come in and relate them to us.
Well, and I'm thankful for you having the book here too,
Yeah, I mean, I want people to get this book because it's so full of great
and
stories.
and the thing about everyone's autographed. I autographed every one of them, and I think you'll find it enjoyable. And the most enjoyable, one of the most enjoyable things out of the book is that anything you pay for this book, whatever they charge you, it stays right here with the museum.
Thank you.
It stays right here. I don't want a penny of it. I want to help this great Clarksburg History Museum because it is fantastic.
Thank you.
I endorse it 110%. And you're still adding on and adding on. It's a never-ending add-on.
You just never can run out of things to put in here.
No, you can't.
We're running out of space. That's the problem, though.
If you haven't been in here, you owe it yourself to come into the Clarksburg History Museum.
Yeah, we're on Main Street, the Board of Education building. We're open 10 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday.
Right.
And come in and see it. And if you have, anything to donate, please, come in.
Sure.
But I want you to come in and get Lew's book because I highly recommend it. It's wonderful.
Thank you, Martha.
And Lew, before you leave, I want you to do your 2 signatures.
Okay.
With all the gusto you have, your 2 signature sayings that I remember from radio and television.
Let's see if this old man can bring them back to life again. How tough are you? You better believe it, Mama.
Yes. That makes my day.
That made my day. I still got the voice for it.
You have a great radio voice. I am telling you. So, folks, I just want to thank you for joining us today with Lew Dobbins. And Lew, I hope you'll come back again.
I will. Just ask.
So remember to make each and every day count, and remember that you are making history today. Thank you very much.
West Virginia mountain melody, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies. There's sweet music in the silence of your wildwood, to the rhythm played by every mountain stream. It becomes a lullaby every time that I come home to West Virginia in my dreams. West Virginia mountain melodies, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies. I feel secure in the arms of your green valley. There's a peace you've given me that's yours alone. Take me in like a child to the gentle of your wild West Virginia. I'm coming home. Your West Virginia mountain melodies, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain melodies. West Virginia mountain melody, there's a new river singing to me. Oh, this time it's wild and free, your West Virginia mountain